My toxic best friend overstepped by claiming maid of honor, disrupted wedding plans, and planned her wedding on my date to create chaos. Original post. Some background info about this girl. Let's call her Jess. At this point in her life, she's kind of a hot mess. She's one of those people who airs everything on Facebook, who has a new love of my life every month and a new best friend every few months. Her relationships and friendships usually end terribly, with both sides hating each other. How did I become her best friend? Well, she hasn't always been this way. She was relatively normal 5 years ago when I met her, save for the normal, early 20s drama. But in the last 2 years, she's lost her mom to cancer and her grandpa to old age, and she doesn't have any other family. She dropped out of school and found out her boyfriend at the time was cheating on her. After the breakup, I was acting like a shoulder to cry on since she had pretty much hit rock bottom. A few months later, she was telling everyone how close we were and started tagging me as her best friend. A few months ago, I got engaged. Unbeknownst to me, she started telling everyone she was my maid of honor, even though I've always planned on making my sister my maid of honor. But this was right after Jess's mom had died, so I just improvised and said I would have 2 maid of honors. It's still not what I would have liked, but I literally couldn't bring myself to tell this poor girl I don't consider her my best friend. That was my first mistake. About a month after I got engaged, she met a guy. 2 weeks later, she was engaged. A week later, she was married. A month later, she was divorced. Separated? I don't know if it's legal yet. I don't know if anything was legal, but she changed her last name and is still going by that, so I'm guessing it was legal. Ever since the divorce, my own wedding planning has become unbearable. She is constantly telling me how marriage doesn't work, love can't save things, etc., etc., and criticizes how much I'm spending on my wedding when she had hers for a few hundred. Vegas wedding. It's gotten to the point where she's rude to the vendors I'm meeting with, but she gets really upset when I don't take her to meetings since she's the maid of honor. So I'm at the point where I just want to cut her out of the wedding, like I should have done in the first place. However, when I confessed this to a mutual friend, my friend let me know to be careful because Jess can be really vindictive. When she found out her ex from a few years ago was getting married, she tried to contact the bride and tell her he was cheating on her. He wasn't. One of her last besties was fired from her job because Jess made multiple email accounts and regularly contacted customer service complaining about her. And since she knows so much info about my wedding already, I'm really terrified that she'll somehow try to sabotage it. So basically, I don't know what to do at this point. I feel like this wedding is getting away from me, but I also don't know if it'd be less painful to keep her a part of it, because it would save me all the drama. I don't know what she's capable of, so I'm really worried that she'll somehow make everything harder for me if I don't just grin and bear it. Help! Plodder girl I've been comforting through traumatic times turns out to be batshit crazy, and now I think she's going to ruin my wedding if I don't go with the flow. Relevant comments. Comment 1. To add, it might be a good idea to have passwords with your vendors to confirm your identity. Oh Pete, thank you for the advice. I was actually considering the password thing, but I don't know if that's taking things too far. I guess I'm kind of worried about vendors resenting me for being high maintenance. But I hear about bridezillas, momzillas, in-lawzillas all the time, so hopefully this isn't the worst they've seen. Comment 2. Jesus just told her, Jess, you knew him for 3 weeks before you married him. What in the ever-loving fuck did you think was going to happen? If I've only been seeing a girl for 3 weeks, I won't even poop with her in a half-mile radius. Oh, seriously, the week before the wedding was everyone kindly saying, you sure? You've known him for awfully short time. And she responded, everyone's jealous because they can't be us. Yeah. Comment 3. Sounds like you need to have a very uncomfortable talk with this girl. Tell her what you told us here and let her know her negative attitude has no place in planning your wedding. You're sorry things aren't working out for her, but she is not allowed to pile this stuff on you. Tell her that you cannot have her as a maid of honor, and since she seems to think so negatively about marriage, you wouldn't expect her to do this. Up to you if you even let her attend the wedding as a guest. Oh my God, I haven't even thought about explaining how her negative attitude towards marriage could be the excuse for not having her in the wedding party. That sounds ridiculously logical, but I've been blinded by a flurry of crazy. Thank you? Update. Guys, this went full-blown crazy. Before I could have a conversation with Jess, she confronted me about it. Apparently the mutual I confided in let the whole story leak, and a twisted, more dramatic version made its way back to Jess. Shit, meet a fan. It was an hour or 2 of me trying to explain to Jess in a somewhat calm manner that I felt she had overstepped her boundaries, and it was really taking a mental toll on me, while she yelled about what a terrible friend I was and how she's tired of putting all of her faith in the wrong people, and how she was tired of trying her best to be a good maid of honor. I made the mistake of pointing out that I had never asked her to be my maid of honor in the first place, and she responded with, "Well then I must be delusional." The first step is admitting you have a problem, so progress. Needless to say, we aren't on speaking terms. Shortly after that I took all of your advice and called all of my wedding vendors and let them know that my fiancé and I were going to be the only people making any decisions, and set up a confirmation word with them. Apparently this shit happens a lot because nobody even asked why. I accidentally forgot to contact the bakery making our cake, but luckily they called me and asked if I was certain I wanted to cancel the wedding cake. Apparently there was a voicemail left on their machine. Wonder how that happened. Here's where things get really nuts. A few weeks after our blow-up she apparently met some guy who was the love of her life. A few weeks after that they're engaged. I can't make this shit up. She did it again. Then our mutual friends get invitations for her wedding, which is the same date as mine. But since they had RSVP'd for my wedding, a lot of them couldn't make it. A few days before her wedding, they have to cancel because he's already married, and you know what? So is she. I guess she never got officially divorced from that first quickie wedding, so as far as I know no wedding actually happened. I have no idea if they still plan to. I'm just glad to be away from that circus. But anyways, I got married a few weeks ago. Everything was wonderful, the weather was great, and everyone present was a joy to be around, except maybe my uncle who gets a little too dancy when he's drunk, but you know. Family. Thank you to everyone who responded, and to everyone letting me know I'm not helping matters by going with the flow. I will be actively practicing caution when making friends, by running from crazy and not comforting it. Relevant comments. Comment 1. Anyone else think mutual friends are kind of shitty? She was the one who told OP to be careful about Jess, yet she decided it would be a good idea to blab about what OP told her, knowing full well it would get back to Jess. Now instead of telling Jess on her own terms, OP got ambushed instead. OP. I actually asked her about it a few days after the blow-up. Her defense was that she didn't actually tell Jess, she told another mutual friend of ours, who told someone else, who told someone else, who told Jess, so technically it wasn't her fault. Which is how by the time it got to Jess the story was somewhere along the lines of, OMG. BobbleSex1 is telling everyone you're ruining her life and sabotaging the wedding. All of us met at work, we all worked at the same restaurant long ago, and it was always a drama-filled place. A lot of the same people still work there and still thrive off of the drama. I'm thinking it's time for me to move on from that specific crowd. Cliques are fun in middle school. In your 20s, not so much. Comment 2. I will be actively practicing caution when making friends. By running from crazy and not comforting it. I'd like to nominate the first candidate for your new policy. The mutual friend, who somehow let the story leak and repeated to Jess a twisted, more dramatic version of what you had confided in her. Ope. I've decided to distance myself from that crowd. We're at different points in our lives, and I just don't find gossiping all that fun. My real besties, from high school who were all bridesmaids, have all grown up and we would never pull this crap. Comment 3. I bet Jess was never actually getting married this time. It was just a plot to ensure at least some of your friends didn't make your wedding. Oop. I suspect that as well, but since she's done it before I wouldn't be surprised if she actually went through with it. I'm assuming they were both trying to get divorced before the wedding and realized they wouldn't be able to in time, because you know, some stuff takes time and can't be erased in a jiffy, so they couldn't do it. I get the feeling this guy is either really stupid or just as crazy as she is, so at least they found each other. Now to the next story, story 2. Am I the asshole for refusing to help my father and stepmother and telling them they deserve the karma hitting them hard right now? So, when I was around 16, my father, 44 million, began seeing my stepmother Julia, 30 million, and they married 2 years later. Just to clarify, this woman never liked me. She's the reason I was kicked out of my house at 19. Since then, I haven't spoken with either my father or her until a few days ago, when my father arrived at my place to talk. I'll get to that later, but first, I need to explain what went wrong so you can see who Julia truly is. My mother died when I was just 9 years old. My father had been in other relationships since then, but he was completely committed to Julia from the start. She moved in with us within a few months. Even though she was only a few years older than me, she required me to address her as Mom. At the time, I was 16 and she was 24. We were just 8 years apart in age. I never called her Mom, or saw her as maternal, since I thought it was inappropriate. Even if she had been older, I doubt I would have addressed her as Mom, because my biological mother had died only 6 years earlier. I wasn't prepared to start calling someone else Mom and replacing her so quickly. Furthermore, when Julia made her request, she had only been with my father for 8 months. They might take their relationship at their own pace, But that didn't mean I had to accept her into my life at the same rate, especially since she hadn't tried to get along with me. I calmly informed her that I would not feel comfortable referring to her as my mother because I did not feel linked to her or saw her as a maternal figure. I don't believe I was impolite, but she began to pick on me for no apparent reason after that. She would either be extremely hostile or completely ignore me. It was strange, and it was evident that I refused to address her as Mom. I never understood why it was important to her. As far as I was concerned, my father adored her and had totally accepted her as his companion. That should have been enough, but she was fixated on being my mother. She even behaved like she was, albeit not in a good or compassionate manner. She would order me around and pretend to have authority over me. It was as if she wanted to establish herself as a capable mother figure. This behavior bothered me. I'd remind her that she wasn't my mother and didn't need to be so involved in my life since I wasn't ready to give her the responsibility. She'd complain to my father, we'd argue, and things would become uncomfortable. But, in the end, my father and I loved each other enough to reconcile despite Julia. This was how we spent nearly 4 years. After they married, I assumed Julia would start acting normally because she no longer had any reason to be insecure. However, their marriage made her even more determined to become my mother. A few months after their wedding, she sat me down for the same conversation. This time, she said she would love it if I called her Mom, since now that she and my father are married, it will help complete our family. She required that I acknowledge her as my mother before anything could happen. By then, I'd seen her true colors. I couldn't believe she had the arrogance to demand that I call her Mom, after mistreating me for the previous 4 years. I wasn't especially pleased with their marriage because I knew she didn't like me, and to be honest, I didn't care for her either. I've never been one to mince things, and at 18, I made that abundantly plain to her. After the way she had treated me over the previous 4 years, I had no desire to accept her as my mother or a sister in realizing her dream of a perfect family. I advised her to concentrate on being married to my father and stop worrying about becoming my mother because it was pitiful. I informed her that I already had a mother, whom I adored, and that just because she died in an accident didn't mean the post was open. In very straightforward and respectful terms, I told her that I was not going to replace my mother and that she should stop trying. I also added that her fixation with being my mother was strange, scary, and completely unappreciated, especially given how brutally she had treated me simply because I refused to call her Mom. I'm not proud of it because it wasn't very nice, but I did hint that her obsession was psychologically abnormal. That remark evidently irritated her, since she stopped speaking to me entirely following that chat. It was as if I didn't exist for her. At the time, I didn't think it was an issue. In fact, I was relieved when she eventually decided to stop bothering me. About a year later, I understood she had used that time to turn my father against me. It happened so gradually that I didn't realize my father was distancing himself until it was too late. When I realized, I attempted to fix things. I tried multiple times to bond with him, hanging out, talking, and reconnecting, but he was either too busy or constantly with Julia. I recognized that his priorities had evolved after his second marriage, and I attempted to give them space. But it backfired because Julia took up all of his available space in life. Things only got worse after I moved away to college. Whatever little communication I had with my father was vanishing as well. It felt dreadful, and I knew I needed to do something about it. One weekend, I planned to surprise my father by going home. I anticipated him to be pleased, but he appeared annoyed. He informed me he had planned to go out to dinner with Julia, but now that I was home, he couldn't do so. I found this quite offensive and challenged him about his actions. I told him he was acting aloof and strange, and it pained me that he wasn't even pleased with my surprise visit. I conveyed that it felt like he no longer cared about me. In despair, I lashed out at Julia, accusing her of turning him against me. This evolved into a full-fledged argument. My father told me that he knew I had something against Julia since the beginning. He said Julia wasn't attempting to turn him against me, but rather I was trying to turn him against her. He accused me of trying to brainwash him into thinking Julia was the bad guy, despite the fact that she had done everything she could to win me over. According to him, I was the one who turned down her attempts to bond because I did not want to betray my mother. He even suggested my mother would be upset with my behavior. My father informed me that making up tales about Julia to build a wedge between them would not succeed. Over time, I saw that Julia was gradually changing the narrative, telling my father that I had been ignoring and mistreating her from the beginning. Whenever my father was around, she was nothing but lovely, leading him to believe she was incapable of being mean to anyone. He gradually came to believe her account of events. He assumed I was causing issues because I couldn't accept Julia as his wife or come to terms with his departure. This was far from the truth, but my explanation fell on deaf ears. He accused me of attempting to sabotage their relationship and lying about Julia. Then he issued an ultimatum. Either I start respecting Julia, call her mom, and accept their relationship, or I leave. When my father said this, I didn't bother to argue. I hadn't unpacked anything yet, so I grabbed my bags and marched out, never looking back. After that, I went directly to my uncle's place. He was the closest relative I had. He's my mother's older brother and has always had a warm spot for me. I knew that no matter what challenges I had, he would assist me. At the time, I hadn't told my uncle much about Julia. I already knew he didn't like her or support my father's connection with her. Part of this was due to his loyalty to my mother, and part of it was because he thought the age difference between my father and Julia was too great. I didn't want him to detest my father any more than he already did, so I kept quiet. However, after I was kicked out, I told everything to him. He was infuriated. He told me that I had done the right thing by refusing to call her mom, and that Julia was a complete nutcase. He also called my father an absolute moron for believing all of her falsehoods. Once he realized the truth, he told me that he would take care of everything. He offered to cover all of my expenditures, including college tuition, which had previously been my father's burden. He also said that if I ever needed a place to stay, I could always come to him. Even after I graduated, he promised to help me out. True to his word, he supported me every step of the way and has become more of a father to me over the last 6 years than my biological father ever was. As I previously stated, I have not had touch with my father or Julia in 6 years. No one else in the family has. After I told my uncle everything, he was so enraged that he told everyone. I didn't ask him to do anything, but he was too angry to worry about the implications. He notified both my mother's and father's side of the family about the incident. According to what I've heard, no one has contacted my father or Julia since I was kicked out, as they were all against what had transpired. According to my uncle, several individuals attempted to persuade my father to listen, but he refused. He accused me of lying and said they should not trust me. Fortunately, my family knows I am not the person my father and Julia portrayed me to be. As a result, my father and Julia have been forced into extreme isolation. However, I doubt they care because they have not contacted anyone in the last 6 years. On the other hand, I'm doing well for myself. Following graduation from college, I began interning at my uncle's real estate firm. I eventually obtained my real estate license and relocated earlier this year from my former apartment to a much larger one in a more desirable location. I am no longer concerned about my finances. I've even started paying my uncle back, despite his insistence that he doesn't want anything from me. My financial situation is crucial because I believe it is what prompted my father to contact me again. Karma seemed to have caught up with him and Julia. A few months after giving birth, Julia was engaged in a horrific accident. She is currently bedridden and unable to move. My dad paid me a visit a few days ago. During our talk, I discovered that he had quit his job a few years before to start his own firm. Unfortunately, things haven't been going well because the epidemic struck shortly after he started. He has been experiencing financial difficulties. Furthermore, Julia refused to work, leaving him with sole responsibility for financial management. This circumstance is not surprising to me. Julia quit her work shortly after they got married, which he chose to disregard. Things got even more difficult financially when she found she was pregnant and decided to keep the kid. She gave birth approximately 6 months ago. Then, last month, she was involved in a horrific accident while driving herself home from lunch with her friends. She totaled the automobile due to icy roads and a little too much champagne. Fortunately, she was not charged, but it doesn't matter because she severely hurt herself and is now bedridden, unable to move as she heals. My father is in a bad situation because their medical insurance does not cover hiring a nurse. He needs to pay for one out of pocket because he can't stay at home to care for Julia and must work to prevent bankruptcy. Meanwhile, they've been leaving their kid with Julia's parents, but her parents just informed my father that they couldn't watch the child every day because they needed to live their own life. This resulted in a dispute between my father and Julia's parents, with him accusing them of being greedy. As a result, they refused to look after the baby anymore. My father, now out of alternatives, admitted he had no one else to turn to and chose to contact me for assistance. When he paid me a visit, he recounted everything in the hopes that I would intervene. Without hesitation, I declined. I'm not good around newborns, and I definitely didn't want anything to do with Julia's child. Given how much agony the two of them had given me in the past, I refused to allow myself to be used to solving their problems. I told my dad that, while it was good to see him, I was no longer here to serve his purpose. He became enraged, claiming he had gone to considerable lengths to obtain my contact information. From his statements, I deduced that he must have pestered some relatives until they informed him where I lived. I didn't think this was a great attempt, and his entitlement simply made me angry. I reminded him that when I needed him the most, when I begged him to believe me, he had refused. He chose Julia over me, and now I'm choosing myself over him. Despite my repeated requests, he refused to leave. I finally lost my patience. I warned him that if he didn't leave, I would contact the cops, which would end horribly for him. In a heated exchange, I informed him I had no sympathy for him and was not interested in assisting or forgiving him. I said he and Julia deserved all they were going through. After all, Julia had continually lied about me, portraying me as the monster. My father had decided to trust her falsehoods and prioritize her ludicrous requests, even to the point of kicking me out. Instead of believing his own daughter, he favored his wife and her unreasonable expectations. When I said that, he looked shocked and swiftly departed without saying anything. I now feel guilty about what they are going through. I know it's bad, and I'm not sure if I should have stated they deserved it. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. I'm not the judge. Still, the guilt weighs on me. Edit. I called my uncle to tell him of my father's visit. He spoke with a few relatives and confirmed that my father had reportedly been contacting everyone after many years, searching for my location. Most people had not responded, but one family on my father's side, who isn't very close to me, felt sorry for him and provided him my contact information and address. So, I was correct. My father did not go to the great lengths that he stated. He was only attempting to make me feel bad. Update 1. I'd like to thank everyone who commented on my post. It was a lengthy post, and I have not discussed it in depth with anyone other than my uncle. It was good to finally get everything off my chest, particularly regarding Julia. Her actions deeply traumatized me when I was younger. Based on the remarks, I believe I was correct in stating that Julia may have had some mental health issues. Her eagerness for me to embrace her as my mother was overwhelming. That being said, I can only infer it. I cannot diagnose her. However, I believe she would benefit greatly from seeing a psychiatrist to determine what was driving her conduct. It seems ridiculous for her to act the way she did simply because I refused to call her or accept her as my mother. Throughout my father's relationship with Julia, I tried to make explanations for his behavior. I knew he loved her, so I tried not to make a scene. But it didn't seem to matter. He didn't care. When it came down to it, he chose Julia above me, his biological daughter. So he had the guts to come up at my house after 6 years of no communication, asking me to assist him out. Even now, I know he was not sincerely sorry. He just apologized because he wanted my aid, not because he truly meant it. In reaction, I have taken precautions to protect myself. I've upgraded security measures around my house in case he shows up again. If he does and refuses to leave when I ask, I will contact the cops right away. Ideally, I'd prefer that he not show up at all, but I realize that's wishful thinking. He's going to come back and attempt to get me to help him again. He already has my contact details. He had been contacting me for the past few days, but I blocked him after a few hours. It's been nearly 5 days since his visit, and I presume he's been taking his time. However, I have a feeling he'll come up again. Just so you know, I'm not afraid of what he may do. It's just that I'm already emotionally spent, and I don't want a long argument with him. That is why I am taking every precaution to avoid protracted chats and have him depart as soon as possible. I'm hoping that when I see him again, it won't be too emotionally draining. Update 2. 2 days ago, I posted here that I was confident my father would return. Actually, he did. He waited a week since our last meeting and came up today. When I spotted him standing outside and ringing the doorbell, I told him over the intercom that I didn't want to speak to him. I had just gotten home from work, so I was exhausted and not in the mood to deal with him. When he refused to go, I grabbed my phone, contacted the cops, and reported him for trespassing. He couldn't hear me from inside and had no idea I'd contacted the police. Until they arrived, he waited outside my door, beating on it and complaining that I was being too hard on him. He stated Julia admitted to making everything up and that they were both deeply remorseful for everything. He explained that all they could do now was apologize and hope for the best, as they couldn't go back in time to fix things. He insisted I give them some leniency, especially given what they're going through. I couldn't believe that even after discovering Julia had lied to him, prompting him to kick me out, he became defensive rather than admitting his sins. He was taking the entire issue so nonchalantly, which was annoying. However, I maintained my composure and did not speak to him. Thankfully, the cops arrived shortly, because his "what can we do about it now" attitude was really getting on my nerves. It was especially distressing because he had wrecked his relationship with his own daughter due to Julia's lies and still couldn't hold her accountable. When the cops arrived, He lost control and began yelling at me, claiming I had lost my mind and had no right to call the cops on my own father. I didn't care. I described the entire thing to the cops. I doubt he will face any charges, but I hope this teaches him a lesson. He did not physically resist being dragged away, but he did stare at me the entire time. I could see he was mortified, but I didn't mind. I was so pleased that he was being removed and that I would no longer have to deal with him. It may sound callous, but after today, seeing how little he appeared to care that Julia lied and ruined our relationship, I feel validated. What I mentioned was completely accurate. He and Julia deserved each other, and more importantly, they earned everything that was happening to them. Perhaps the small one didn't deserve it, though. The only person I feel sorry for in this circumstance is my half-brother. There's not much I can do about it but hope for the best. I sincerely hope for the best for him, at least since I have nothing against him. He's merely a youngster who has no idea what his parents are like. I'm praying that he doesn't get caught up in all of this commotion and has to suffer as a result. If he does, he will be the second child Julia and my father have failed, after me. Update 3. After the officers took him away, my father did not contact me for over 3 weeks. Then, a few days ago, I got an SMS accusing me of being awful. The message stated that I was a terrible person and that they regretted reaching out to me in the first place. It stated they were ridiculous to expect me to understand their situation because I've always been a selfish brat who didn't care about anyone else. According to the book, selfishness, not Julia, damaged my connection with my father. The message came from a number I didn't recognize, so I assumed it was my father or Julia. It doesn't matter. That was the last I heard from them, and they haven't contacted me again since. Interestingly, I heard about my father and Julia again today. My uncle called to tell me that a few cousins on my father's side had notified him of their current position. Apparently, my father and Julia are now living separately because he has been requested to leave his home. Julia's parents have moved in to care for her and the baby. According to my uncle, my father considered leaving the infant in foster care until they could get back on their feet. Julia became outraged and threatened to divorce him. Although he was able to calm her down, she was still so enraged that she had him kicked out of the house while she healed. I find it amusing that after kicking me out, he is now experiencing the same situation. One thing is certain, Julia has a mental health problem. Normal people do not behave in such extremes. That being said, I don't have to worry about it because she's no longer in my life. I just think it's funny that my father is going through this, and I felt compelled to share. This is really his karma. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.